Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis is going to come on with us. His website is defensepriorities.org. He's the author of a book called The 11th Hour in 2020 America, and you could buy that on Amazon. He's retired from the U.S. Army as a lieutenant colonel, 21 years of active service. He's currently a senior fellow and military expert for Defense Priorities. He was in combat 4 times, Operation Desert Storm in 91, Iraq in 09, Afghanistan twice, awarded the Bronze Star and 2 Bronze Stars over that time. Let's get Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis on the line here. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Sure, thanks for coming on. For the average person who sees, the video of fiery balls going through the air and buildings on smoking and just all the carnage that's going on, what is the Russian advance at this point? What damage have they done? How far have they gone? Has it been a successful 2 days?
There's a lot of cloudy information on this. You actually have a couple of things working against you. You have outright intentional disinformation being set out by both sides. For example, I've seen the Ukrainian side talk about all these massive casualties on the Russian side. I've seen the Russian side talk about whole units of Ukraine military has defected and threw down their arms or whatever. Probably none of that's true. But it's also true that war is chaos. It's always harder in real life than anyone thought it was going to be when they were planning. And then the factor is that there's just no accurate reporting. You don't have a lot of, news people out in the middle of the countryside to actually tell us what's going on. So it's really hard to tell exactly what is going on. But what we do know is that Russian troops continue to advance all over the country in very different, in 3 at least different, what they call axis of advance. They've come in major 3 areas from the northeast, and then from the southeast. And they were penetrating into the country. There's been a number of battles. Both sides have lost some aircraft. But what it appears so far is that Russia is making steady progress, though slower than they anticipated.
And the idea is to take control of the government.
Well, that's really up for debate. It's not really clear what their objective is right now. I'm trying to divine it based on just what I know from military history and also from my own personal experience fighting in tank battles during Desert Storm. What I think that they're trying to do Russia is to make several penetrations, not go into the cities right away, but bypass some of the cities and try to attack the Ukrainian armed forces in the field, in the cross countryside, because that's where Russia has the greatest advantage over the Ukrainians, because they have greater firepower and greater armor and greater mobility than the Ukrainians do. Once I think that they get them down to a certain level where they're not that much of a threat, then I think you'll see them turn and start to surround some of the cities, probably Kiev, because of its symbolic value. And then they'll try to press for a political outcome on the Ukrainian government. And what it sounds to me like, and we see the first vestiges that are already playing out, is that they want Zelensky to do one of 2 things: either flee and leave the capital and let some other caretaker government take over, or negotiate a settlement to where he will declare Ukraine as a neutral country, declare it will not join NATO, in which case, so far directly from the Kremlin, they have said, yes, we're very much interested in that and we're willing to negotiate that. Because what Putin had said from the outset, one of the few things he said that you can actually take him at face value, he's lied so many times, is that he has no intention of occupying the country. And I believe him on that because he has no value in doing that. That's all downside. But what he does want to do is force a change in the regime, whether that's a change in attitude or an actual physical change in regime that's not going to join NATO. Once he gets that by whatever means, then I suspect he'll do like he did in the Georgia War in 2008. He'll withdraw the bulk of his troops back into the area where the Donetsk and Luhansk areas are, where their enclaves are, and probably leave, quote, peacekeepers there long term to just kind of like say, hey, we're on the border here and we can come back if we need to. And then let Zelensky have it, or whoever. That's what's happened so far. And I don't know if you saw the news just hours ago, but Zelensky said that he is willing to have this negotiation. They're coordinating with Israel, the prime minister of Israel, to see if he's willing to host it for both sides.
And you think that's all it would take? Ukraine?
Yeah, it seems too late for that, doesn't it?
Agreeing to be neutral?
No, yeah, that's what he's wanted all along. See, Putin doesn't want terrain. He's not like after to win over Ukraine any more than he was after Georgia in 2008. He expressly did not attack further into Georgia when he had every opportunity to, because he doesn't want the terrain. He just doesn't want NATO on his border. And he has been absolutely unequivocal about that and relentless since 2007. He's never changed his tune on that.
NATO's on his border in Estonia, Latvia, Poland.
Yeah.
So is that next?
Yeah, no, that's actually different. That's militarily, that's different because it's basically kind of a strip up there, which leaves those three countries very vulnerable. And frankly, one of the reasons why I was not for their being included in the NATO alliance, because it's very difficult to defend them. So it's also very easy for Russia to defend against it and to threaten them should they ever do anything hostile towards him. But the Ukraine, though, was bigger because it's a 1,200-mile border, and it leads straight to Moscow. And that's a much bigger deal. And he said it from the beginning that that's different.
So you really think this is more of a defensive maneuver than it is an offensive maneuver?
It's a fear maneuver. It's because, look, even though we don't think anything, all we think of is, oh, NATO's defensive. As long as you don't attack us, it's fine. And virtually every Western person thinks that way. Russians, on the other hand, have a longer historical memory of being invaded. I want to say it's 4 or 5 times over the 18th and the 19th and 20th centuries from the West. Not the most famous being the Nazis coming in there after they had apparently had deals. So they don't trust anybody in the West and never have. So even though we say we're not going, they don't trust our word for anything, and they fear that we're going to do it anyway. So that's what's driving him. This is fear.
Ukraine has talked about joining NATO for about 18 years. Why did he wait to this moment to finally invade?
I think that he just finally had enough because NATO continues to move in the direction. We increased our rhetoric about bringing them in. We increased the number of troops. We started putting troops in Ukraine. We started training their troops. We started putting infrastructure into Ukraine. And Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, emphatically said, I want to say it was as late as December, maybe in November, he reiterated, no, we are still going to invite them. We are definitely going to do it. We're going to make good on the Bucharest. And I think Putin finally said, look, that's it. I've reached my limit. And concurrently with that, to answer really your timing question more, he has spent the last 15 years, and especially since 2008, reorganizing and modernizing and then testing out in the field his military. And I think he finally was comfortable enough in its quality to say, okay, now I can actually take action here, whereas before he really couldn't. That's why he didn't do anything in 2004, even when the Baltics came in, because he didn't have sufficient combat power. Now he does.
Now, I know you said that the information can be unreliable, but there have been reports of severe resistance from the Ukrainians. Do you think there's any chance they could fend this off, or any chance that Russians back home in Russia will rise up and oppose this?
Well, that's a two-part question. I'll take the second part second. The first part is Ukraine has a long history of being fierce fighters and being fiercely independent and hating anybody who invades their country. And there's been lots of animosity between, especially the western portion of Ukraine and Russia, for quite some time. So there was every expectation, at least for me, that Ukraine was going to put up a fight. The problem is they don't have the capacity to sustain that fight long term because they're just not as qualified, not as quality of an armed force. They're primarily an infantry force. They're primarily been fighting for 8 years on a trench line, so it's a static kind of situation. Their army is only about 8 years old anyway. Not many people don't realize that in the 2014 war when Russia took the Crimea, there was only 6,000 total members of their army, which is hard to believe it was that small. So it's about 150,000 now, but it's very young, and it takes a long time to develop, especially higher-level commanders that they need 10, 15, and 20 years of experience, none of which they have. But the Russians, on the other hand, have all this experience, and they have actually tested their weapons and their formations in the field. move them over large distances. And so they've had lots of training and field experience to actually moving in simulated hostile territory, which the Ukrainians don't have. So I think that long term, even though they may be fighting hard and they have tremendous courage, they just don't have the capacity, and especially infantry against armor is not a fair fight.
One more quick question before you go. If all it takes is to declare Ukraine neutral and promise not to join NATO, why didn't President Zelensky do this a few weeks ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been arguing and passionately for months that that's exactly what he should have done. That's what we should have done. See, look, the West knew that we were never going to invite NATO, Ukraine in. We knew that. We knew we weren't going to fight for them because we knew that it would draw us into a war that could potentially go nuclear. That's why not one NATO nation agreed to fight for Ukraine. But if we recognize that, then why didn't we just do the obvious and say, hey, for our own self-interest and for the interest of Ukraine, we're just going to withdraw our or even just say, you can put a nice face on it. We're going to put a moratorium on it for the time being. Now, that would not, nor would it still now, like, consign Ukraine to be a subservient of Russia or a vassal state. Not at all. It would be like Finland, which is entirely independent, or like Austria back in the early part of the Cold War when they declared neutrality. All it means is that you're not aligned with the military bloc and you maintain all of your independence and freedom. Okay. That's why I said that it was a good idea, and they just wouldn't do it.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, we appreciate it.